President Trump has one concern only: what's good for President Trump. He doesn't have, the expression from Louis XIV, l'état c'est moi, the state, that's me. Behind every monstrosity in the Middle East, you'll always find the Saudis. So they don't care about Gaza, but it doesn't look good. That's Western propaganda. There's no distinction. Everybody likes to blame Netanyahu as if the others are any different. They're all Jewish supremacists. They're all genocidal murderers. There are small differences on policy. Targeting UN workers, well, that's clearly, it's not a war, it's a genocide in full view. So in that case, they're actually worse than the Nazis. The Nazis built, they did pretend it was not happening.
There has been an announcement of a ceasefire, but is that ceasefire holding? What's happening on the ground in Gaza? How has this conflict impacted not just the people of Palestine, but the question of Palestine itself? To discuss this and more, I'm being joined in an exclusive conversation with Dr. Norman Finkelstein. He is a professor, a renowned author, scholar, and an expert when it comes to not just the Holocaust, but also the Israel-Palestine conflict. Professor Finkelstein, thank you so much for joining us here. Let's begin with your assessment of what's happened in Gaza, and then we'll take it to the history and the current situation. But what's your assessment on what's happening in Gaza today?
What's happening in Gaza today is the hostages held by Israel, the hostages held by Hamas have been released. And beyond that, the other 19 points of President Trump's so-called ceasefire plan will be quickly forgotten. The situation will return to what it was before October 7th, with the big exception that Gaza is no more. The place has been pulverized, decimated, reduced to rubble. There's nothing there. And Israel will have achieved its fundamental aim of, as it said from day one, to make Gaza unlivable, or to give the people of Gaza two choices: to stay and starve or to leave. And they will figure out ways to leave. Everything else in the plan is complete nonsense. Most of the Arab countries, not most, all of the Arab countries simply agree to anything Trump says, and then they walk out and they forget it. And the Israelis, of course, never intended to honor any of the provisions of the peace plan, except to engage in a temporary ceasefire until the hostages were released.
Well, is the ceasefire holding at all? Because we are seeing them continue bombarding and bombing areas now where people thought they were safe.
Yeah, because I said we're going to return to the situation before October 7th, where periodically Israel launches its high-tech killing sprees to keep reminding the people of Gaza who is in charge.
Professor Finkelstein, how do you see President Trump's role over here in the Israel-Palestine? I don't know if I should call it the peace process, but the question of the Palestine question, the Palestine question, and the question of bringing about peace or harmony in the region. What do you think President Trump's role has been so far?
President Trump has one concern only: what's good for President Trump. He doesn't have, the expression from Louis XIV, l'état c'est moi, the state, that's me. He conflates the interests of the state with his own personal interests. Now, in general, that's not incorrect. He's a member of the economic ruling class. So his interests are the interests of the ruling class. They do overlap. So when he looks out for his interests, he's looking out for the interests of the class he serves, the big capitalist class. However, sometimes his interests do not overlap with that of the big capitalist class. So Mr. Trump is at heart, he's a real estate developer. And you don't change, your DNA doesn't change when you hit your 70s. It's baked into him. He's a real estate developer. That's his instinct. That's his reflex. That's his impulse. And he's been very straightforward about it. He calls the potential of a deal with Saudi Arabia, he calls it, quote, the deal of the century. Because for him, it will be a real estate bonanza. Saudi Arabia is investing trillions of dollars in, quote unquote, modernizing itself, which basically means construction. And he will get, his son, the nitwit, Jared Kushner, his daughter, his son-in-law, his daughter, Ivanka, they will get probably a very high percentage of those real estate contracts. But there's one problem. Saudi can't sign on to the deal of the century while Israel's committing genocide in Gaza. Not that Saudi cares. I mean, the Saudis starved to death, 100,000 children between 2015 and 2018 when they imposed the embargo, the blockade on Yemen. They're monsters. Behind every monstrosity in the Middle East, you'll always find the Saudis. So they don't care about Gaza, but it doesn't look good. You don't sign a big deal in the middle of a genocide. That's a bad op, which is all they care about. So Trump will will try to freeze the current situation, which is returning to before October 7th, which means periodic killing sprees, but not the nonstop, real-time genocide in Gaza.
Okay, let me put out an argument that Israel has been putting out for a very long time, ever since October 7th, that for Israel to survive, Hamas has to be finished. And that's why they'll carry out this operation till the time they finish Hamas. Do you buy that argument?
No, there's no basis for Hamas.
That all this was carried out only to finish Hamas.
It never had anything to do with Hamas. Israel made that very clear on day one. When Mr. Netanyahu said, remember what Amalek did to you. Amalek meant, the allusion was to the Hebrew Bible, and it was about killing not military people. It was killing every man, woman, and child. It wasn't about Hamas. When President Herzog said, this is within the first week, there are no civilians in Gaza. They're all Hamas. That's not about Hamas. Half of Gaza's children. So when he says there are no civilians in Gaza, they're all Hamas, he's talking about more than 1 million children. When Defense Minister Galon said, we're not going to allow in any food, fuel, water, or electricity, who's going to be affected by that? Only Hamas? Is it only Hamas that needs food? Now, you might say they made those statements in the heat of anguish over what happened October 7th. There's one problem with that argument. 2 years have elapsed. Did they kill every man, woman, and child they could? Yes. Did they distinguish between Hamas and civilians? No. Did they block food, fuel, water, and electricity from going in? Yes. So they did it for over the last 2 years. They did exactly what they were going to do. This wasn't about Hamas. You followed the news. Name me one battle that's been fought in Gaza. One battle. Have you read any headline that said a battle was fought? One headline that said a battle was. There were no battles. This was an extermination. It had nothing to do with Hamas. Hamas was a sideshow. They never really saw Hamas. As of now, one Israeli is killed about every 3 days. One every 3 days. You know how many Palestinians are killed every 3 days? About 225. 1 to 225. Does that sound like a war, or does that sound like an extermination? When you have a ratio of 1 to 225, what does it sound like to you? If I were telling you there were a conflict, and for every soldier on one side, 225 civilians are killed on the other side, would you describe that as a war, or would you describe it as a slaughter?
Okay.
We're breaking
Why
up.
is there no international outrage the way there should have been? And a lot of people who've not followed Israel-Palestine conflict or what's been happening in Gaza wouldn't know that this is not new to Gaza. They've bombed Gaza before. They've bombed the daylights out of Gaza. They have imprisoned children and minors for years. They've been doing it. But this is different, and there has been no international outrage. There have been statements, but no serious move to stopping Israel. Why?
First of all, there has been international outrage at the popular level.
Yes.
Even in my own country, Israel's standing has plummeted among the population, even among Jews. Now, the latest polls show that 40% of American Jews believe Israel is committing genocide. That's a quite astonishing fact. I don't even think during World War II, 40% of Germans would have admitted to that fact.
I meant governments primarily who can act against Israel.
Governments are governments. They look out after the interests of the state. And Gaza is a tiny people in a tiny parcel of land, which from the point of view of governments has no significant assets. It has no assets. It's just people, half of whom are children, and governments. That's not a factor when they're making decisions.
Are people distinguishing between
unless their interests would be served by paying attention then they'll make an interest, but then they'll do something. But otherwise, they're not going to do anything. And then there's always the fear of retaliation by the United States. The only one that stands up to the US are the Chinese. It's true. They laugh,
That's
they
true.
laugh. You're not going to push us around. Those days are over. The days of when China, the days when China was the sick man of Asia, as it was called in my generation, those days are over. You're not pushing around the Middle Kingdom. So I'm sure that Mr. Xi just has a hearty laugh every time Trump comes to him with all of his bluster and threats. But other than the Chinese, everybody's afraid.
Very little that countries like Ireland and South Africa can really do. You follow the entire region, Professor. Do you think, who do you think is the greatest disappointment in this conflict? Is it the Arab world? Is it
The
is it
Arab
the
world is
West?
the
Is it
Arab
the
world.
international?
The Arab world has never done anything for the Palestinians, except when it's afraid, because I have to make a distinction again between the governments and the people. Uh,
Yes.
the the government, first, let's start with the people. The people, uh, the Arab world is not what it once was. It was always corrupt. It was always authoritarian. It was always filled with despots. However, since in the 21st century, Iraq is no more. Syria is no more. Libya is no more. Uh, Yemen is in civil war. Lebanon is always on the brink of civil war. Uh, if you go down the list, they have their own internal problems. So it's hard for the people to summon up the energy to identify with Palestine anymore because of what's been done to their own societies. So I don't fault them. Uh, as for the governments are just Western puppets and appallingly corrupt.
But what about the governments? Are they to be held accountable for what's happening in their own backyard, in their own region?
Look, the world is a tiny place. You know that. I don't make distinctions between your own backyard and anything else. The United States enabled the whole genocide in Gaza. Okay, Gaza isn't in our backyard, but we enabled the whole thing. Israel couldn't blink an eye, couldn't inhale or exhale a single breath were it not for the US. That was a made in Washington genocide. It wasn't initiated by Washington. It wasn't pursued by Washington, though Washington did want Israel to destroy Gaza, not because it hates Gazans like Israel, but because Israel is a pillar of U.S. policy in the Middle East. And it's a strategic asset, and that asset was significantly undermined by October 7th, when it looked as if Israel's technical mastery, its surveillance technology, its military competence, it looked as if it were much less formidable than met the eye. And so the United States wanted Israel to restore what Israel calls its deterrence capability. And deterrence capability basically means Israel's capacity to terrorize the Arab world into submission. That's its deterrence capability. And that capability was significantly undermined October 7th. So how do you restore your capability? You inflict massive amounts of death and destruction on Palestinians or on other Arabs. So the U.S. did not just subsidize, make possible the genocide. The U.S. also had a strategic interest in it. The United States wasn't happy when Iran was humbled, wasn't unhappy. The U.S. wasn't unhappy when Iran was humbled. The U.S. wasn't unhappy when Hezbollah was effectively destroyed. The U.S. is happy with those developments. But did they want the genocide to continue to the point of complete annihilation of the Gazan people? Probably not. They wanted to restore Israel's deterrence capability, but they weren't determined that Israel should carry out a genocide.
Do you
But they
make a
weren't going to
distinction?
stop it.
Do you make a distinction between Israel, the Israeli administration, and Netanyahu? Because what we're seeing now.
That's Western propaganda. There's no distinction. Everybody likes to blame Netanyahu as if the others are any different. They're all Jewish supremacists. They're all genocidal murderers. There are small differences on policy, whether we should get the hostages back first before we continue the genocide, or should we continue the genocide even if the hostages are killed. There are small differences, but if you look at the public opinion polls, there's no difference on the genocide.
What really surprised me, Professor Finkelstein, was during Trump's visit, those we thought were liberals, those we thought what Netanyahu was doing was too extreme, also did not speak up. Nobody spoke up.
Who said that? Half of Israeli Jews are on record as saying they support genocide in Gaza. Between 70 and 75% of Israeli Jews believe there are no innocents in Gaza. The children are not innocent. About 80% said they're not troubled by starvation in Gaza. This is not Netanyahu. Netanyahu is the reflection of Israeli society. That's why he's the longest sitting prime minister. He is them. He's an obnoxious, narcissistic Jewish supremacist. And that's a large proportion of Israeli society. Obnoxious, Jewish supremacist, narcissist. That's Israeli society. They are the Übermenschen, the supermen. And the rest of the world, not just Arabs, okay? Arabs and blacks are at the bottom, but not just Arabs. They feel that about everybody who's not Jewish. They're Jewish supremacists. They are the chosen people. That's how the chosen people, they are the supermen, the Übermenschen.
As somebody who's born into a Jewish family, Professor Finkelstein, what made you think and consider the Palestine question so differently? What was the influence here? And I do know that your family, a generation above you, have suffered at the hands of the Nazis. So, but what really happened here?
My parents were different. And the apple did not fall far from the tree. My parents, they were humanists. They would never uh, say anything critical of those who were suffering.
As a historian, explain and break it down to us, because a lot of people don't understand the real problem that exists. The question of Palestine. Israel has a position and a standing that they have a right to that land. It is their homeland, and that's the reason why the Jews returned to Israel, to Jerusalem. Explain to us what the position is historically, and did Palestine exist at all? Because they've questioned that too.
I don't think it's useful at this point in time to go over that history. It would take a long time to go over it. The basic fact is Israel, or Israelis, are there. It's already been a good century that they've been there. And I'm not sure if it serves any purpose to stake out who is there first, who gets to keep it all. The fact of the matter is, the Palestinians long ago in the 1970s had already reconciled themselves to the fact that Israel was a fact, that it was there. They were prepared to negotiate a reasonable settlement of the conflict. But the Israelis, operating from a position of power and being fully backed by the United States, were not prepared to make a settlement in accordance with international law. Occasionally, they were willing to make settlements, but the settlements were being dictated by them on their terms, which fell, depending on the period, very far or not so far, but still short of international law. So the Palestinians rejected the Israeli settlements, which were short of what international law granted them. And in recent years, Israel has just turned into a Jewish supremacist state where the only option for the Palestinians is to leave. That's the only option, of leaving, or to live a miserable life as a slave, or to live a miserable life as a slave, or to leave. In the case of Gaza, not even to live a miserable life as a slave. In the case of Gaza, it's, as the Israelis put it, if you stay, you starve, and the other option is to leave.
Thousands and thousands of children have been killed, families destroyed.
I would not say thousands, I would say tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands of people have been killed, and
tens of thousands of children,
about 18 to 20,000 children have been killed, and many families destroyed. What happens to the two-state solution? Because is there a possibility of...
We're dealing with a lunatic state. It's a state steeped in racism, drunk with power, consumed by revenge. It's a lunatic state. There's no point now to talking about a solution. You have to figure out how to deal with the question in Gaza in terms of pure physical survival. Beyond that, there's no basis to talk about a solution now. Solution with who? Who's going to implement it? Is the United States going to force Israel to implement a solution? Answer, no. Is Israel going to agree to a solution apart from the final solution, exterminating them all? Is Israel going to agree to it? Answer, no. So then what are we talking about? It's all theater. When the French and the Saudis go to the UN to say we support two states, it's a theater. It's the equivalent of a Potemkin village. Has nothing to do with reality.
But it has to stop because I,
Well, the first
living
order,
so far away, Professor Finkelstein, I'm tired of seeing videos of wounded children without families, without parents. It's just heartbreaking. Something has to be done. What,
yeah,
according to you, can?
Israel has to be stopped, and the U.S. has to be stopped. How do you do that? Nobody's willing, no state is willing to do that. Who's going to stop the United States from supplying Israel? Who? Will Israel stop without the United States forcing them? No. The U.S. will force them to stop the overt genocide, because, as I said, Mr. Trump is a real estate developer. That's not a joke. He doesn't hide it. He doesn't refer to treaties. He doesn't refer to agreements. He refers to deals. Everything is for him a deal. He's a real estate developer, and he wants that Saudi development money. That's his, it's like asking me to become a monk. I can't change not overnight. It's like asking Gandhi to start eating meat at age 75. Is that going to happen? Is he going to start eating meat at age 75? So Trump is age 78. Since age 20, he's been a real estate developer. You think that changes? That's just silly. He wants the Saudi deal, which he calls the deal of the century, which it would be. Obviously, could develop China, it would be different, but China doesn't need Trump to develop. China has a government, resources, all the infrastructure to develop on its own. The Saudis look, can you name me anything the Saudis have done no, seriously. Have they won a Nobel Prize? Have they won a musical competition? Have they won an Olympic medal? Anything? Nothing. Nothing. So
This
they
is
need,
absolute doomsday prediction from you, Professor Finkelstein, because I said it's doomsday prediction for Palestinians. If
it
there's
has
no
nothing,
solution.
it has nothing to do with doomsday predictions. It's just factual matters. The Gulf states, somebody once said, they're not states. They're family-owned gas stations. That's true. Qatar is not a state. The Emirates is not a state. They're just family-owned gas stations. So they need Western U.S. Support. So they'll do what they need to get U.S. support. And the U.S., as I said, its main concern is to keep Israel as the regional cop on the beat, the regional policeman. And otherwise, it's very personalized. Trump's presidency is a very personalized presidency. Most presidents, they have some vision of serving the state. And for them, serving the state means first and foremost serving their class interests. Trump's serves himself. It's a personalized a very eccentric, personalized presidency. Now, in general, his interests, when he's looking out for his own interests, in general, they are the ruling elite interests because he's a member of that class. So he identifies with their interests, but there are points where it's just him. That deal of the century, he's not trying to get that deal of the century for the United States of America. No, he's not. He's trying to get for his portfolio.
That's right. But do you think it'll change after Trump? Because I truly don't think so.
Yeah,
The
we've already,
blockades happened during Obama's time.
one
The
second,
war
we've already,
began during Biden's time, and then Trump has just followed through. I don't think anything, or do you think anything will
that
change?
part, yeah, I agree with that. Biden enabled the whole thing, the Biden administration, Biden and Blinken. They
Absolutely.
enabled the whole thing. It wasn't Trump. Most of the killing, I think, when Biden left office, it was about 40,000 people killed. Most of it occurred under him. He was, there was no difference really between Biden and Trump on Gaza.
So will there
Now
be a
that
difference after Trump? Will there be a difference after Trump?
times are changing. We shouldn't, we're now going to have in the Jewish capital of the world, we're going to have a pretty decent, no, not perfect, but a decent mayor. That's a very big change.
Yes, that's a change.
The largest Jewish population in any city in the world. They say after Tel Aviv, but it depends on how you calculate the size of Tel Aviv. This may actually be the largest Jewish population of any city in the world. It's going to be led by a Muslim mayor, which means nothing because London has a Muslim mayor who's useless, but
Yes.
who's militant on the question of Palestine.
Absolutely.
So things change, and public opinion has dramatically shifted. The last polls show that most Americans feel more sympathy, a majority, more Americans feel sympathy for Palestinians in Israel.
Even
Yeah.
if there's a ceasefire and Israel stops the bombing, it doesn't change Israel's policy. And not many people in America or across the world then get to know what's happening. What's happening with settlers expanding is not news anywhere. You and I follow it, so we know. Not many people know what they've done in West Bank. Everybody's focused in Gaza. So is there a future?
Look, I totally agree, but there's one big difference. Gaza is no more. Gaza is about 50 million tons of rubble. There's nothing there. They made Gaza unlivable. That was the whole point. They were hoping for a stampede that they could push the whole population across the border, which is what they did in 1948. It didn't work. So now they'll have to settle for a slow trickle out of Gaza. You can't reconstruct Gaza. A, Israel won't allow it. And B, even if Israel allowed it, the international agencies say it would take 50 up to the year 2050 to reconstruct Gaza. It's not just rubble, though rubble is a problem enough. It's rubble mixed in with toxic substances like asbestos and unexploded ordnance. I think President Trump called it's a demolition zone.
Okay, but the hard truth, and my final questions to you, Professor Finkelstein, the hard truth over here is that sadly nobody wants Palestinians.
No, yeah,
they're not welcome anywhere. Look at the United States.
And neither were the Jews. Neither were the Jews wanted anywhere. That's why they ended up being exterminated when obviously there was places for them. It's true of the Palestinians. Yes, I agree. At least nobody in the Arab world wants them.
Where do they go? They can't leave Gaza. They're confined.
People have tremendous powers of ingenuity. I think they'll figure out ways to go. As my friend Mohan Rabbani said, it didn't require trucking Syrians out, but 2 million Syrians are now in Turkey. 1 million are in Lebanon. Do the math. That's 3 million Syrians, and there are about 2,300,000 Palestinians. I think they'll figure out ways to leave.
That's rather unfortunate. Professor Finkelstein.
Unfortunate, it was a crime unfolding before our eyes. And a lot of ordinary people, not governments, though I give credit, of course, to South Africa and to Ireland. But a lot of ordinary people did not turn their eyes to what was happening, didn't turn their eyes away from what was happening. A lot of ordinary people did not turn their eyes away. And despite all of the media disinformation, the truth managed to get through. Most people realize Israel is a terror state. It's really it's a Jewish supremacist, it's a Nazi state. Unfortunately, the population is totally insane. It's an insane population. It's
You know, I keep saying we don't know what we'll say to our future generations because it's on us. We let it happen and we have no answer.
I'll be dead for the future generations, so that'll be your problem, not mine.
My final question to you, Professor Finkelstein. A lot of people, and I've interviewed a lot of Israelis too, who, including Gideon Levy, who've spoken quite strongly against the Israeli government. But many of them I speak to do not want to compare what's happened in Gaza to the Holocaust. Do you think it is uncomparable, or what the systemic manner in which this Israeli administration is doing what they're doing to Palestinians is state-sponsored execution, discrimination, and extermination?
It's really state-sponsored. Comparisons are always imperfect. That's why they're comparisons. There are going to be differences and there are going to be similarities. When you compare genocides, obviously numbers matter, and there's no comparison in the numbers between Israel and the Nazi genocide. Numbers matter. On the other hand, Hitler and the people surrounding him, they recognized you can't do that sort of stuff, a genocide in public. They did it behind behind closed doors or out in the killing fields in the course of a war, which everybody had the alibi. It was fake, but the Germans had the alibi. It was fake, that they didn't know. You can't say that with the Israelis. Everything was unfolding in real life before your eyes. There was no attempt to conceal. Well, there was some attempt. They always said they were fighting Hamas. But anybody who had his or her eyes open recognized that when you are, as it's been documented, targeting children, as it's been documented, targeting journalists, as it's been documented, targeting medical personnel, as it's been documented, targeting UN workers. Well, that's clearly, it's not a war, it's a genocide in full view. So in that case, they're actually worse than the Nazis. Nazis built, they did pretend it was not happening. They tried to create plausible denial. Now, they knew something horrible was happening. 50% of the Jews were not killed in camps. They were killed on the field. They were just, during the war, they were just lined up and shot down. So obviously the soldiers knew what was going on. But the Israeli case, just the brazen, in-your-face starvation remember, when the camps were liberated at the end of World War II, people were shocked by the physical condition of the inmates. But in Gaza, it's out in the open. 500,000 people were 500,000 people, a quarter of the population, were being subjected to a man-made famine. A man-made famine. Not unlike, by the way, the famines that Britain created in India at the end of the 19th century. As Mike Davis put it in his book, the title was Late Victorian Genocide in India. Those were in Bengal.
Yes.
I guess in Bengal was 1 million people who died, isn't that right?
Yes.
In the genocide. These are man-made, man-induced genocides. The difference is, of course, you can count on the fingers of one hand the number of people outside India who were aware of what was happening.
That's true.
But in the case of Gaza, everybody knows. It's right there in your face.
Nobody can say we did not know about it, but it's happening. And governments have done nothing about it. We'll have to wait and see how this really pans out for the people of Palestine. For now, like you said, it does seem like they will ultimately have to.
Yeah, I think that's correct. It's a political fact and a physical fact. The physical fact is Gaza has been reduced to rubble. The political fact is Israel will never allow Gaza to be rebuilt with the people still there.
On that note, Professor Finkelstein, thank you so much for joining us. Indeed, a pleasure. Thank you.